Yeah, and that's the thing. So, I mean, I think what's
Yeah.
really needed is to realize that, and this isn't just for Pashtuns or for Afghans or for
Yeah, yeah,
Pakistan. It's
yeah.
that the reality is that these borders were generally drawn over us. Okay,
Mm,
and so, for example, like Amina, you mentioned you're from the Moment Agency. There are Moments in Afghanistan. There are
yeah,
Moments in Pakistan, right? You are, by a definition of a patrilineally derived tribal organization, you're closer to an Afghan Moment than
yes,
you are to, let's say, someone in Lahore. I, for
yeah,
example, am a Kakar. I'm closer to someone in, let's say, Job than I
yeah,
am to Sangar, for example.
right.
But the reality is that these borders were drawn over us, and when we start to equate nationality with ethnicity,
Mm,
we're going to
mm,
have problems.
yeah,
So you can be ethnically Uzbek and a citizen of Afghanistan. You can be ethnically Afghan and a citizen of Pakistan. Because
yeah,
once we start to equate ethnicity with nationality, we're
yeah.
going to have what the Europeans had, which
Mm,
was centuries of war, millions of people killed,
yeah,
mass displacements, mass uprooting. And
mm,
Pakistan's experience, with the partition in India
yeah,
was pretty ghastly. We need to ask ourselves, do we really want that? Not just on the Durand line, but, in northern parts of
yeah,
Afghanistan or
yeah.
whatever.
Oh,
Unfortunately, we didn't have much say in how,
the
these
borders were
political.
drawn. Yeah.
Exactly. So we can continue to fight the never ending game, which is an inheritance
Mm,
from colonialists, or we
right.
can just say, look, listen, we are where we are. We can still work together to improve
Mm,
the pretty miserable lives of our people. So
yeah.
that's once I think the biggest, we can acknowledge that our societal political structures are lagging behind, let's say, those of the West. But we
Yeah.
really do not need to transplant their mistakes into us, whereby nationality and ethnicity become the same thing. That would be a
Yeah.
disaster.
Yeah. This reminds me. Sorry, I'm interrupting. But something that Atul Vajpayee, he said about neighbors. He said you can't change friends, and certainly not neighbors. And it's the same, in the context of it doesn't only apply to India, Pakistan, but also the Pak-Afghan relationship. And again, as I say, the only way is to find a workable relationship. That's the only way you can move forward. And I
Exactly,
think
because
here
we're not going anywhere and you guys aren't going anywhere. And
I know, and I
we,
know. Despite my Afghan friends, it's interesting. You've reminded me of something. So we had a trilateral between, a bilateral between Pakistanis and Afghans. But of course, the Americans they funded. So it was the Holling Center. So it was a nice location. We went to Turkey, Istanbul, and this was just recently, last year, and it was an amalgamation. We had I was representing the Pashtuns, and then we had some Balochis, we had Punjabis, we had Sindhis, and the same we had a mixed batch from the Afghans. So during the day we'd be at each other's throats, but once the sessions would be over, so the Pashtuns would go with the Pashtuns, the Hazaras would go with the Hazaras, from
yeah,
Balochistan, and this is how it was. And it's interesting. They used to say that well, we don't recognize Pakistan as such because we say that you are on Afghan land, you have Arab religion, and you've got Indian culture. And I found that really interesting because that's the first time I had heard, some Afghans do feel that we're like this, or that we are not, as old or historic as the Afghans are. And that might be true to some extent. But the fact is that, as you said, we have to try and live with one another. And I think we have seen periods of, good relations. And I think one thing that could create some sort of stability is if we have economic interdependence amongst each other. Because when
that's
money is
that's the
involved, I think it
that's
really
the
works.
example of the
China,
Europeans that
or
is
even
from
the Americans,
exactly.
and or even China or India, despite the fact that they've been at, look at the border issues they've been having, whether it's Doklam or recently, at the LAC. But the fact is that I think, economic interdependence, once it's on a legal basis and it's state to state, I'm not talking about the illegal trade, I think it could change the ball game altogether. And I think that this whole Wagah route, I think Pakistan could gain so much if we do open the route for, a two-way traffic. We're
100%.
scared. We're scared that the Indian goods will flood the Afghan market. That may be so, but then we could, earn so much through the transit trade. And I think this would also be then, a card that we could use as a pressure tactic on both India and Afghanistan. Yet at the same time create, and this would be positive, kind of economic interdependence and, positive, ways of reassuring or reasserting itself on both the countries. But I think our leaders are not thinking in those terms at the moment.
No, certainly not. And I think coming back to the final point I want to raise with regard to your question earlier is that the guys in Kabul, whenever they get into a position of power, they like to think of themselves as Pashtun nationalists, like standing for the interests of Pashtuns. By adopting a belligerent stance to Pakistan, the people they actually harm the most are not others, it's Pashtuns, because that region is inhabited by Pashtuns. So, the Soviet war, the Pashtun areas were devastated. The American war, Pashtun areas once again devastated. So, it's all well and good, the rhetoric about the Durand Line, British Raj and all of that. Don't get me wrong, it's an excellent speech. It's excellent, one may even fall for it. But in reality, what does it mean? It means that Pashtuns on both sides get the short end of the stick. So exactly. There needs to be an acknowledgement of that when the two states are not getting along and when they're at each other's throats, the borders close down. When the borders close down, both sides suffer economically. When they foster proxy groups into each other's territory, local people die. Superpowers get dragged in, and it's a never-ending disaster.
No, I agree. I couldn't have said it better. Yeah.
And I think we've discussed everything. I mean, there was a lot that I wanted to discuss, as is the case with Afghanistan and Pakistan. Sangar, is there anything that you wanted to add or that I missed out? Or
it was very enlightening. I really enjoyed listening to you because I must say we are trying to create a dialogue where we can be very balanced. It is a challenge. It is very difficult, but we want to create a platform where we can have these balanced conversations and where different perspectives can have their say. And at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is achieve mutual understanding among Afghans and the international community. And what you have said, I think that it was very beneficial, and that's why we would love to have you in our show more often, so that we can learn from your perspective and your analysis. So thank you very much. I'm going to add your link of your Twitter page, your website, the website of Institute for Strategic Studies in our show notes. So anybody who wants to learn more about Amina Khan, her work, you can
read the reports that I was talking about.
Yes, they will all be mentioned in the show notes of this podcast. And who knows, inshallah, we will have you again as a guest soon.
Amina Khan is doing a PhD on the Afghan Taliban, so once that comes out, I'm sure discussing it will be interesting.
Well,
so,
I don't know if you'll agree, but I feel that the group is evolving. It's changed.
I'm sure.
But
I think we get different messages, we get different impressions of them almost every other day. So by the time that your PhD, inshallah ta'ala, is completed, I'm sure there's going to be a lot to discuss. Hopefully, we look forward to having you as well in the future, inshallah. Like Sangar said, what we're trying to do is trying to posit a counter narrative to what we usually hear, because not only is the animosity fueled by people in Islamabad and Kabul, but also from the Kremlin and from the White House. And what we're trying to put forward is something different, where people can maybe see things in a different light, understand each other's grievances, concerns, considerations, and their hopes. So, if we manage to convince one person to see things in a different light, that will be an achievement. Inshallah.
Inshallah. No, again, I'll just end by thanking you. It's been a great session. And again, I'm glad, because usually it takes foreigners to get me involved or engage with Afghans. So I'm glad that, it's the Afghans themselves that have done it themselves. So in that sense, I'm very happy. And I'll just say this much, that look, I will end by that Pakistan has a lot to answer for. And, I'm not absolving Pakistan of what it has or it hasn't done. I think we're all mature enough to know who's done what. But to pin all the responsibilities on Pakistan, I think is just counterproductive, and it doesn't help either state. It's very difficult to overcome, the history of the past and the mistrust that unfortunately continues to exist. But I think it's through dialogues like this where we can talk and we can question each other. And, we don't have to agree to each other's points, but it's through interactions. And I follow your, podcast religiously, and I think you're doing an amazing job. And I think, again, it's just through interaction and dialogue.
I think the final thing I'll say here is that the tendency to blame on the other is also it's a hangover from colonialism, whereby we are so poor, like we have absolutely no say in what happens to us or what happens to our country. It's always the other side. And when Afghans do it to Pakistan, or Pakistanis do it to India, or Afghan, or even Afghanistan, like PTM being called. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It doesn't actually bear any fruit, and neither does it hold any water. Right. So, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm glad we're going to irritate people on both sides almost equally with this podcast. That's what we're here for. Right. So yeah, Sangar, should we end it there?
Yes, on that note, this was our 15th episode of the AfghanEye podcast. Amina Khan, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. It was having you. Everybody who is listening to this podcast for the first time, we are available on all streaming services and we're on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.